Welcome back to another episode. This week I've got a really special guest who we met maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
And it was like we spoke the same language, and it's been super fun to be able to talk ops and things together. She's got a book out that I definitely recommend. Another one coming. Welcome, Lia Garvin.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming all the way to Maui.
Oh my God. So excited to be here. I know. Live in person. What could be better?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this for a while, and it was like, do we do it over Zoom?
Yeah.
Do we do like something different? Do we do a little series? And then you were coming out to Maui, and it was like, I just got back a couple days ago. It was like, this might work perfect.
No, exactly.
So I'm super excited, super stoked to have you here.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, like, talk a little bit about your background. I think it's super interesting. I actually don't know anybody in the space that does quite what you do.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm a team operations consultant, and I came from working in big tech for over a decade. I worked at Microsoft, Apple, Google, driving team operations within product teams. Mm-hmm. And in that work, I kept noticing like everything felt more complicated than it had to. People weren't talking. There weren't like clear expectations. And, it was funny because in trying to fix these little sort of systems things, people would often say, shouldn't you be in HR since you care about people? And I said, we all should care about people, frankly, but I would weave it into like how work got done and make it into how program management worked and team operations worked and how software was designed into getting communications moving more fluidly. But I did feel like I was kind of out of place for a long time doing that. And so about a little over 2 years ago, I left the corporate world. I left Google where I was at and launched my business, which I had been building in the background for quite some time with my first book, TEDx talk and things like that. But launched it full time doing kind of working across small businesses, supporting business owners, really setting up their team operations and learning how to manage, because for many of them, they've never done that before. And then doing a lot of work still with corporate teams on team dynamics, again, manager trainings, things like that. Really kind of how to just build better teams.
Tell me what you think of this description, because whenever I describe you to people, I always say she does very similar stuff to what I do, but she does the soft skills.
Yeah.
She does the team building, the communication, like that side of stuff. Would you agree? Would you add anything?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would say I think systems are something that I do bring, but it's more of how do you communicate and get alignment. So it's still that side of it. Like, I'm not going to implement ClickUp for someone, but I'll say, hey, whatever tool you choose, here's how to get people to like use it and follow it. And how do you do that? So yeah, I would say it's how do you really build alignment and accountability, and what are the communication tools you need on that side of it?
Yeah. How do you feel like the Silicon Valley background is more than just like that experience? How does that make you unique, other than just being like obviously great like resume builder, right? But what do you feel like you took from that? Because I feel like what you do now is so almost counter to that.
Yeah.
So do you feel like it more so just like taught you what the missing pieces were, or is it more of, are there lessons you learned from that?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I think when you say these names, especially a place like Google, which has been studied as like, like places that define how to work great together and things like that, I think you do learn that nobody has it all figured out, and I loved working there. I had some amazing experiences, and I learned that like, hey, we can bring together the smartest people in the world, the best of their trade, and they still need support in like how work gets done. They still need those things. And I think that's something that was definitely helped with imposter feelings, because I look around like, okay, like this person doesn't know what they're doing. But also I think feeling like really coming into, okay, well, how can I add value in this environment where I'm not an engineer? I don't have an MBA. I'm like, I felt like I wrestled with that for a long time. And so I think a lot of what I learned, I would say, working in Silicon Valley was to really figure out for myself and how to help other people figure out, what is the value and impact they bring, and how do they communicate that, and how do they tap into that? And so in a lot of the work that I do with managers or leaders or even business owners, maybe they've changed careers and they feel like, well, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I'm new at this. Like, let's look back at the whole trajectory. Maybe you were a lawyer or this or that, and now you like, have this, gym or something, or med spa, but like, let's bring some of that in and have it be part of the story and how you show up for your team.
Yeah. Do you have a particular like size a company where you see that it's more obvious that they need that?
It's interesting because the same tools that I utilized within big tech, which I talk about in the book, are the exact tools I use with small businesses. So I think the size is more about like the level of kind of more hands-on I'll be. And so for companies that are maybe less than 10 employees, don't have anybody working on ops, things like that, that's where I'll find, okay, they need to just kind of figure out, well, how do they communicate? How are they going to track work? How are they going to assess, what success looks like? How does the business owner get in the right sort of set of, how are they focusing on the right things? Go from 20 or 30 to 50 employees, then it's a lot of like, how do you teach that line of managers, how to do that?
Yeah.
So then it becomes, like you said, working with the operator or whoever. And then larger than that, where there's a lot of managers or managers of managers, then it's a little bit more like it would be in a corporate setting where there's a lot of pre-established maybe priorities or goals that those folks you're working with, it's a little bit out of their hands. So then how do you connect those leaders back to that bigger vision of the company? What does it look like for the team? What does it look like for the employees? Kind of like all down the chain. So like connecting the dots at each rung of that ladder.
Interesting. So I've kind of noticed this pattern like stair step wise where, and these are, rough, it depends on the particular industry or type of business, but it's like less than 5, less than 3 employees. Like you just kind of have like some admin, like assistants, that kind of thing. And like no one's really generating revenue for the business.
Yeah.
Once you get over that, you now have people like once you get to 7, 8, 9, 10 people, it's like they have to be bringing in revenue for you to afford that payroll. Yeah. And so I see kind of this stair step where it's like people got to get to like 3 to 5. They first have to just hire employees. Like that's step 1. And then it's like they get kind of that like 3 to 5 range. And then they get to like this, I don't know, I would say like 10 to maybe 20. And it's kind of broad, but just because every industry, it can be a little different. I'd say if I had to pick one, it's like 12 to 15, and very rare that you get to like 20. But there's another stair step there where they're able to do it. They have people that are generating revenue, like they're starting to build the business systems, but there's still only one layer of accountability. Yeah. And so they're still one-to-one on holding everyone accountable. Yeah. And what I find is a lot of times people have to relearn how to run their business, both in terms of like how to use a scorecard or metrics to make decisions, but also how do I hold someone accountable who's holding someone accountable? Yeah. And that's so much different than just the direct one-to-one, you and I sitting down or seeing each other every day in the office and having that accountability. Yeah. Do you notice that or how do you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a big piece of that is like one of the fundamentals of delegating both for that business owner and that manager is like managing up is actually a big piece of that, right? Is like, hey, we're not able to, so on the business owner side, when there's like another rung or another step in that, there has to be a level of trust established, but there's a lot of clear norms and expectations around, okay, like if this is offloaded, how do I check in? How do I see progress? How do I stay informed? How do I give the approval at the right moments where I'm not just like digging in and like, kind of poking around for myself. So I think for the business owner's standpoint, that's something they need to be like self-managing, and they can set very clear expectations. Like they can say, hey, with some of these clients or some of these accounts, I'm going to be more involved because this is something they want me to be more high touch or something. It's like, I think the level of involvement feels like micromanaging when we decide later, like something's not going well. So we start jumping in. Yeah. And so I think it's like setting that up front. And then for that, the manager of managers, them really communicating like, here is how I've delegated this. Here is what I think this person's strengths are. Here's how I'm watching them. Like you also avoid being micromanaged by being clear and not just being like, I got this. You see someone is really concerned about something in the weeds, over communicate. You know what I mean? Like that was my skill. I had a major manager in one of my corporate jobs. And at first it like was
Say
so
that 5 times fast. Major manager.
Big time, right? And it was like, at first I was frustrated and I said, I see that's that person's stress response. When they're under pressure, they ask me a bunch of stuff, really basic stuff. I know they know I'm competent because I had other signals that showed me that they were always really advocating for me to be doing more and championing promotions, stuff like that. So it wasn't like they thought I was useless. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to just believe this person doesn't trust me and get in my head about it. I was like, okay, this person needs over communication. So when I started a project, I would write up like, here's my project plan. Here's how I'm going to tackle this. Here's some of the risks I see. What else? Over communicating solves like most of these issues in all directions.
Yeah.
But doing that up front is like my biggest tip for anybody. Not doing it later when it's too late or when it feels too late. So you're not really doing it.
And that brings up a good point, because you mentioned this in the book that sometimes people are afraid that they're going to get asked a question that they don't have the answer to. So that manager might get asked a question about something more on the front lines from their like direct manager that they don't have an answer to.
Yeah.
How do they like navigate that if they're afraid they're not going to be in the know, they're going to look stupid, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then from the flip side, like what should that handoff look like? Because what I've seen is a lot of times business owner, manager, they kind of go like all or nothing. They're like, well, I was told I need to delegate, so I'm just going to, I'm going to delegate. Exactly. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah. So to answer the second question first, the handoff and this kind of all or nothing pattern, I think a lot of us are avoiding, getting negative feedback or being that micromanager or that leader or that coach or whoever it was that was like too much. Or maybe it was a parent and you kind of have these things in your mind. So the thing you're trying to avoid, you actually just do anyway, right? And so I think actually stopping and thinking about, what level do I have to be involved in this? What do I really need? What do I need to be able to trust that person? How much information do I need? Do I really need to weigh in on these things? And what I encourage folks to think about too is, if there are ways that I need this to be done, why is that? Is it because this is some method I use that's proven? Is it because this one kind of client really needs this nuanced approach? Then tell people that. Like, I think a lot of times we have these things that are intuitive to us, and we look around and we say like, why doesn't everyone just notice that? And they're not intuitive to other people. And I've been asked this too, when I say that, do I think business owners are afraid someone's going to steal their secret sauce if they communicate that? I don't think that. I think they don't realize they need to explain it. Yeah. I don't think people are afraid their ideas are going to get stolen. Like, I really don't. I think it's actually because whenever I sit down with someone and say, okay, let's articulate like, oh, why did you do that step? Why did you decide that? They get excited. They want to explain it. Yeah. They're not like worried someone's going to steal their ideas, right? No. So that's how I would answer the second part of that question is figure out the handoffs and say up front, hey, let's figure this out as we go. So the other question, right, worrying, if I'm not in the know, I can't explain where the status of something is, or I can't, I might get asked something and not be able to, argue for it or advocate for it. That's where that managing up comes into play and saying, hey, I've handed this thing off. I trust this person. They're running with it. We're checking in every Wednesday. I'll give you an update on Thursdays, right? And so you're able to then create some space for your team and what you've handed off without getting stuck in something that you feel like, you can't, that you're going to look like you don't know what you're doing, which I think is like, that's the fear, right? I will look bad. So I have to maintain like my hands in all the pies just in case, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that's the biggest. And so the more we can over communicate, you can then go back to saying, hey, remember we talked about, I got that coming, Thursdays. Hey, if there's a really, if there's a big meeting we have or a client presentation, I'm happy to check in with Joe sooner, but like, here's when it's coming.
Sure.
And you can teach that person, you can train them a little bit, I think, to give you some of that space.
Okay. Another question for you. How do you see the best people hold people accountable? Because I think we were talking earlier, like accountability is the crux. It's like the thing. And I remember you and I talked a while back and you were like, accountability is the thing I effing love talking about.
It's my
and
favorite.
I was just like,
yes,
so I love Leah because she keeps it real, but also can like nerd out.
Exactly. It is my favorite. It is. I think a couple of things. We hold people accountable by when we say something, we follow up on it. It's like so basic. But let's say you implement a task tracking system, right? That's one of the places where stuff falls short. You start using Asana or something, and then like no one keeps it updated, and it's like, oh, we don't even know what's in there. Like that's just like a failing of all the other people. It's not the tool was too complicated, right? Like, and so they say, oh, we didn't like the tool, whatever. No, that's like when you decide on something, you utilize that thing to review it, to talk about it, right? So like with something as simple as a task tracking system, which I was able to get like proudly designers at Apple using the one engineers were using. They didn't want to look at it. They said it was ugly. It was like, like this is the kind of stuff I was like, I could get people to use a task tracking system literally like no matter what the situation is. you, in a team meeting, you pull up that system and you talk about it from there. You go back to it. You show we use this for this, right? So you build muscle memory around it. And then when you remind folks, not through just annoying emails, but you come over and sit down with them and say, hey, we got to have our tasks in by Friday so we can load balance and make sure that you're not overloaded. You know what I mean? Or we got to know what's finished so that we can make sure you're getting paid the right thing or you're not, right? So you make it always about what's in it for them.
Yes.
That's the number one strategy with implementing any process, any system. You have to land what's in it for that person. And the biggest blocker of accountability, and I did an episode on this recently on Managing Made Simple, is saying, I need... it's me. You're not accountable to me. You're accountable to your freaking job. You know what I mean? And so hey, this has to be done by 2 because we have to get it to the client by 4.
That's such a good point. Just the language around that. Yeah.
And so I noticed that because when I worked in design operations, I would go up to designer and say, hey, I need you to finish this by 3:00. Otherwise, and it's they were like, meh. Do they want to do that for me or not? If they like me, they will. If they don't, they're like, F this, right? And so truly, and it hit me really hard because I have a client and he had a marketing person or he had an employee that he really wanted her to update an end of the week report every single week. And I was coaching him how to really get her to do that. And he sends me this email he's going to send her. And it was like, I really need you to do this because it helps me. And I was like, this person doesn't care because she isn't doing what you've asked her. So this person is not concerned about what you need and what helps you. So I said, let's roll out the status report and don't call it a status report ever. Step 1. But I said, hey, this has to be filled out by 5:00 every Friday so that the work for next week can be planned. And I can give you the hours that you want to have to get paid for. You know what I mean? That's
this is just the reality.
That's why you do it, to have a job, right? And it's funny because I see that issue again. Same thing comes up in corporate. Folks say to me, oh, my team members doesn't want to write their weekly updates. Like an engineering manager will say that to me. And I'm like, they say it's process for process sake. And I'm like, that's not a thing. That's an unexplained process. And I say with something like reporting the work you did in a week, the what's in it for that person is I can give you visibility. I can make sure the right people see what you're working on. I can make sure this goes into your performance review. All of these good things that don't you want to amplify your accomplishments?
Right.
Is it getting lost in a void of a company of 100,000 people, a pretty big risk that you foresee? So the accountability comes from creating a personal buy-in, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it works. And so it can be as simple as a status report. I use that example because that's something that I think folks struggle with, to know what people are working on, because everyone's like, ugh, it's such a tax. It's no, it doesn't have to feel that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you do that when you've got people working on a bunch of different little projects and there's not necessarily anything to measure other than just hey, what'd you get done this week? It's because I'll hear clients say they'll use the word sync. I don't know how you feel about this, but whenever I hear someone say sync, SYNC, right? Or we're just gonna have a quick team sync or a marketing sync. I'm like, it sounds like you have really bad communication.
You're worried what's going on.
And so you have to do one of these randomly to make sure you know what's happening or to help people communicate, because people are starting to hit roadblocks and don't know what to do next.
No, exactly. So I'm going to include this. I'm going to send you this to include in the show notes as this is my status report template. I would love to give it to the audience because this thing is gold. And I made a Loom video of how to explain it because that's where it falls flat. So you use, first of all, the status report itself, not called status report. And at Google, it was called snippets. And I think that was a less intimidating way to describe it.
Yeah.
And it's a document, which all of you will see, which has top wins for the week, place I'm stuck, and focuses for next week. And some people write too much, but I would say 3 things. I would ask people for 3 wins, 1 place you're stuck, and maybe 3 focuses for the following week or whatever. But the framing is what I said, which is, hey, there's a lot going on. Everyone's projects in different places. Some of these are really long term. So so I can make sure that I'm unblocking you and making, that we're all on the same page. There's not duplication of efforts. Everyone on the team is going to fill this out by 5 o'clock every week. I would use have it in a rolling document so that you see week over week. Because if you have a performance issue, now you have your documentation finished. Okay. And that's the other question I get all the time is like, when can I fire someone? I'm not an HR person. I don't know like legally what you can do.
I feel like you do a lot of the HR related things that move the needle.
Yeah. Like you should have
It's like you're not doing like compliance, but you're doing
right.
HR related things. I think that get lost on people or get like kind of pushed to the side where it's like, no, this stuff still matters. This is what drives culture that gives us the intangibles for competitive advantages.
Yeah, exactly. So like if you don't have a task tracking system, or some folks say to me like, I just kind of want to have a sense of the work, having some place people update proactively, and then you can say, hey, it's been, a week or two and snippets aren't in, it's, and I'm saying it's like, this has to be in order to plan the work for each week. Yeah. And there's a real risk of duplication of efforts. And, in order to like sustain
plan for capacity, know what other team members need. Exactly. Yeah. Expectations, handoffs, all sorts. Yeah.
And if someone doesn't care at that point, they're probably not a team fit. You know what I mean? So you also start to get a sense, right? As if someone like can't be bothered to fill that something out, one accomplishment, one win, like basic stuff.
Yeah.
You also get data on that. You know what I mean? Like if that person's not going to help you grow your bottom line, probably. I think sometimes there's situations in which, kind of heavy hitting salesperson or creative person doesn't want to open up this document. It's like, just like get a rhythm, or maybe you do it as a stand up on a Monday and you go around, whatever, but some sort of regular reporting of work does need to happen.
Yeah.
Running a business, stuff's getting done. Right.
Okay. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to rapid fire a couple questions at you. These are things I feel like come up with clients all the time. Operators are asking. Yeah. And so I just want to get quick take on what you think of this. And some of these might be challenging to be short answers, but how do leaders ask better questions?
Ooh, being curious, right? Like, don't ask something to like that you already know or to pin something on someone to get something. Actually think like bring curiosity to it and you'll ask better questions. And then ask open-ended questions, not yes or no. What and how questions.
Okay. Yeah. What and how questions, open-ended and curious.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. This is another common one. How do owners, operators help develop A players on the team? Let's say because I think there's a tactic to try to go out and find A players and recruit them, which I think is a big undertaking.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually an easier pathway if they can nail it is to develop those A players. And so what's the difference that you see where people are able to develop A players and where people miss the mark?
Yeah. I think first is, being comfortable with giving feedback and making it safe for folks to hear feedback. So not doing it in a threatening way, but not avoiding it, right? So you do have to create some psychological safety. You have to be able to have direct conversations and you show people that you believe in them, right? And I think the book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle has great examples of that, right? Like using, sports coaches and whatever of like, we have a high standard and I believe you can meet that and here's how I'm going to help you, right? So I'd say feedback is fundamental. And then being tuned in to like having conversation around what's this person's goals, right? Understanding what their strengths are. Doesn't mean you have to change their job into something they'd prefer to be doing, which is like, I think comes up a lot of like, well, I'd rather do this. It's like, well, you got hired for this. Assessing like, is this person a fit for that thing, right? And so it comes, I think it still comes back to feedback though, right? Like, not, understanding everyone needs little adjustments to be at their best. So I would say like shortest answer is giving helpful feedback and showing them you're here to help them close the gaps and then like doing whatever you've said that you were going to do, being accountable to helping them close the gaps. And then if they're not a fit, like it's okay. Mutual, we're fine, moving on.
Yeah. All right. We talked a little bit earlier about trust and what that looks like. And well, maybe not as much of what it looks like. That's more so my question is it's so crucial as that first step. Yeah. How do leaders coach themselves into or get comfortable with starting to build trust with team members so that they can delegate, hire out other roles, and start to actually build the business where they're not doing everything.
Yeah.
And I guess, is that the foundational piece? Is there a step that comes before that even?
I mean, I think trust is such a big one, and it's one of the things that, I think you can see when it's missing from the outside, but internally people don't realize really often that that's the problem, especially leaders. And I think it's this question of, why don't they just, or it's so obvious, or, I'm so in the weeds. And you're really in the weeds if you're not trusting your team members. Or delegating is really hard when you don't trust it's going to go well.
Sure.
And it might be with yourself. You don't trust, if your business doesn't go well or that you don't know how to delegate, it might be with yourself, right? And so I think it doesn't mean you think your employees are terrible if you're struggling to delegate. I know when I'm struggling to delegate something, it's often like, I don't know if I'll remember everything I'm supposed to say. And I just like, when I'm doing it, I know, you know what I mean? It's like shorthand. So that is where first, I think getting clear around what I need to be doing and what I can let go of. And then of the things I can let go of, like thinking in your mind, like, what do I need to see to be okay with how this looks?
Yeah.
What are the non-negotiables and what can I let go of? And then talking to your team members about that. And if there's non-negotiables, explaining why, being really candid and saying, hey, this has been a hard thing for me to let go of. I built this from the ground up. Like, so this is going to be like, if I get a little bit too far in the weeds, like, can you just double check, or say, hey, is there an issue here? So I think having that conversation is really important. One thing that really stuck with me, this guy that Ed Shine, he writes a lot of books about consulting and working with teams. And he said, like, trust is built on predictability. And that always really stuck with me because I never thought about that before. But, when we're consistent and predictable, we start to know that we can count on that person for that thing. And so it goes both ways. I think our team members trust us when we show up the same way. We're not okay with something one situation and not another. We're not like, the Hulk or something like Jekyll and Hyde, I guess. But with our teams too, and say to kind of build up more comfort, I wouldn't say to trust you. I think that could be off-putting, but like to build up comfort, letting this go. Like, I want to kind of see how you do it a few times and just kind of make sure.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a couple things I would do.
Okay. Last question.
Okay.
How important do you think a company's message is, both internally and externally?
Yes. Okay. Love the question. Because this is another thing I've been thinking about a lot, which is
Trying to give you a beach ball on that one.
Slam dunk. It is so important. I've been thinking about this a lot. A friend and I who's a PR firm CEO, and I do team operations, are looking at kind of working with franchises on their like brand plus team management. And it's an interesting one because if you think about, where the biggest issues with franchises is with staffing and managing teams, and then employees like doing something really dumb or stupid or like that, like makes the brand look bad. Yeah. Right. And so like, those are all like people related things. And we're like,
yeah, when I think of franchising, I think of like fast food chains that are trying to like literally make it like idiot proof.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they're just like, how do I make this so it's just always the same?
Yeah,
and like,
exactly. But that's where you've seen, like, there was Burger King, like, racial profile, and the employees took it on themselves to, like, do that, right? Or there was one cookie company recently, an employee went on Twitter, there was, like, a really long line. He's like, I don't get paid enough for this shit. And it's like, that, like, looks bad for the brand, right? Yeah. And so messaging and communication has to go all the way across the spectrum from how your customers look at you all the way to your employees. Because if you treat your employees bad, your customers don't want to come back.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think leaders need to be thinking about messaging in both directions, right? What are our mission, values, vision? How are we communicating that to clients, customers? And then how do our employees believe that and really feel it? Like, I know Allie Webb talks about, the woman that invented Dry Bar and sold it for like $250 million, said, we want our employee, like, their brand colors were yellow and gray. We want them to like bleed yellow, like, right? Yeah. And they say that with sports and stuff too, but like, how do you make, help, not make, but empower people to believe so hard in something where they will be brand ambassadors? Because then they do all your PR. You don't need any of that, right?
Yeah.
So
I was just in a meeting where we were talking about measuring the amount of employee referrals we get.
Yes.
Because it's not from a recruiting standpoint, but from a how are we doing culturally standpoint? Because that's a reflection of how people feel about us if they're willing to tell their friends and family to come and work here.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like big companies, what are your Glassdoor ratings? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are they saying on LinkedIn? What are people, because I don't really even want to patronize a company that treats their employees bad.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's so much more of an awareness of the employee experience. And we need to be in tune to that. I think actually what you do, a short answer is just have consistency, because then you have the predictability of trust, right? So that would be in thinking about how am I going to communicate this, not just to my leadership team, right? That's a big mess, I think, too. Last point is like working in chief of staff roles. The executive team is really aware of the strategy. Okay, they can recite it. But your employee, like 11 rungs down the ladder, they're like, I never heard the strategy. What do you mean? It's like, and you've talked it to death. You could recite it in your sleep. Well, you need to repeat that in many different ways. Video, all hands, town halls, decks, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's not once,
Yeah, that's so good. The strategy doesn't typically trickle down.
No. And then your team's like, I don't get it. And that's when they don't understand why their performance review isn't good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
oh man, so good. Yeah. There's this old school selling framework that talks about, it's the 4 Ps: people, product, place, price.
Yeah.
You ever heard this before?
Yeah.
And you have to satisfy the first 3 before you give the opportunity to talk about the 4th. And so the idea is you have to satisfy the person, the product, the place before you talk about price. And I used to always coach that the person and the place had this like symbiotic relationship where as one goes up, so does the other. And as one goes down, so does the other. And not necessarily in direct proportion.
Yeah.
But you choosing to work here is vouching for the company. The company choosing to employ you is vouching for you.
Yeah.
And so if I can build reputation, this was more from like a social media perspective of if I can build out the profile, personality, and get behind the individuals in the company, sales reps in particular, it actually is good for the brand.
Yeah.
And so instead of having to promote the brand, I can help my individual sales rep promote themselves.
Yes.
And that symbiotic relationship is going to be more beneficial for me.
Yeah.
And now they've got a head start against all their other competitors because everyone else is just walking in with brand recognition, but not person recognition.
Yes.
And so now my sales reps have this advantage because people are already familiar with them when they walk in the door.
Yeah.
And it's this duplicity where you're getting an effect on both.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So good. So good. Okay.
Love it.
Let's wrap up with, where can people find you if they haven't gotten the book, The Unstoppable Team? Do you still go by, when I first met you, you were the Team Whisperer.
I am sure I am still the
Team Whisperer.
Yes.
Such a good name. Such a good like branding name. It's so
you.
like, you know exactly who she is. You know exactly what she does.
So LiaGarvin.com. Book is Unstoppable Team. I would say my podcast is a great place to get these bite-sized tips around managing. So that's called Managing Made Simple. And get in touch if you want to hear any more about any of this stuff. And I guess we'll have this on my show too.
There we go.
Another one.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's more of these in our future.
I do too. So thank you. And I'm going to include that snippets template. We'll give you that in the show notes.
That'll be great. Awesome.
Yeah. So LiaGarvin.com, Managing Made Simple, and then check out Unstoppable Team.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you.